You're good?
Alright, we're gonna get a signal, and I'm gonna okay, over here, and then you guys will go.
You're going to tell me? Okay. All right, we are live at Clover Park here in Port St. Lucie, Florida, ahead of the Mets Intrasquad game. It's the Pinstripes against Blue. Steve Gelbs with Todd Zeal. Todd, we did this last year, had a lot of fun. Some people apparently watched it, so we said, hey, we'll run it back.
Well, I'm happy to be back here. This is a little different feeling this year. I mean, last year was fun. We got to see Max throw for the first time. This year, there's a buzz. There's fans in the stands. It's a great afternoon, and we're going to get to watch some baseball early on this spring.
Yeah, we're going to get to watch a lot of the stars of this team. Almost the entire starting lineup will be playing today. You'll get to see Joey Lucesy and Dominic Hamill, two relatively intriguing guys, one for the near future and one a little further away. But we'll get to that in just about 6 minutes. First pitch of this one, 110. Todd and I will be back in just a bit. All right, so Todd, just about to get underway here. The Mets intra-squad game. Joey Lucchese throwing to Omar Narvaez. He'll face a blue lineup of Brett Beatty, Lorenzo Cedrola, Tim LaCastro, Ronnie Mauricio, Tomas Nido, Jose Peraza. One of the most exciting prospects the Mets have, Alex Ramirez, DJ Stewart, and Mark Vietto. So a lot of the top prospects in this lineup facing Joey Lucchese. And right off the bat, though, I want to comment again on the atmosphere, because you brought it up right when we came on the air. A lot of what the Mets have been trying to do at camp is to just simulate what it's actually going to be like, and this is adding a nice, neat layer to it to have fans in the stands for this inter-squad game.
Absolutely. I don't know that I've ever seen fans lining up outside the stadium for an inter-squad game, but last year they had some good performances in the inter-squad, and I think people are just excited to see Mets baseball for sure. Good to see Joey Lucchese back on the mound. That's one of the guys that has missed the last year and a half because of Tommy John surgery. He's a guy that has the very patented curve, which is a mix between a change and a curveball. I'm sure we'll see that today. But supposedly, Steve, you may know more about this. Is he unveiling a third pitch today? I think there's rumors that he might have a third mystery pitch.
Well, that's always been the interesting thing about Joey Lucchese, as Brett Beatty steps up to the plate to lead things off for the blue team. But Lucchese's been successful with two pitches, which you don't often see from a starting pitcher. That curve is such a unique pitch, obviously. But there's always been this thought that if he's going to have longevity as a starter, he needs to add a third pitch in. So we'll see. I know in the past he's tinkered with some things and hasn't been comfortable, but now's the time to do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to that point, having two pitches as a starter, some people might say, well, why can't you get away with that? Jacob deGrom last couple of seasons was fastball slider and got away with a lot. But you have to have either an elite single pitch or great command to be able to manipulate the strike zone, get out big league hitters, especially second and third time through a lineup. You've got to be able to show some different looks, and that's what I think he's trying to do to work on a third pitch, yet we haven't seen it yet.
The other thing with Lucchese, as he pours in strike two to Brett Beatty, is that he's signaled he'd be open to being a bullpen piece as well. And I know that Buck Showalter, even at the end of last season, was kind of intrigued by what Lucchese could add as a lefty out of that bullpen. Right now, Mets only have the one lefty in Brooks Raley. But again, Mets have a lot of starting pitching depth, and he's a guy that, especially if he doesn't get comfortable with that third pitch, that could be an option for this team at some point out of the bullpen.
Yeah, it is much more customary, as you're saying, out of the bullpen. Guy can come in and get some big outs with two pitches, especially if he can command them, which right now missing the zone a little bit early in spring. Obviously, he hasn't been on the mound for a couple of years in a game, so I'm sure he's going to have a lot of growing pains and try to work through some things. But he's a veteran guy. He recognizes that there's a lot of depth in this Mets starting pitching staff. As Beatty stays in on a fastball and lines one over the shortstop. Nice job of hitting right there after he worked the count.
And Brett Beatty is someone that certainly everybody's got their eyes on. He showed well, especially offensively, in his limited time up in the big leagues last year. Obviously, he got injured. It cut some things short. But you get the sense, I spoke extensively with Beatty the other day, that it was a real good learning experience to come up to the big leagues and understand just what it took, especially from the defensive end. And he did so much work this offseason, worked with Troy Tulowitzki. Francisco Lindor noted on day one that defensively he looked very different. And I just think, I don't know if it'll happen right off the bat, but I feel like Brett Beatty's a guy that can make a big impact for this team this season.
Well, it's an interesting conversation, Beatty, right? Because there was a lot of people in Mets land that thought Correa was going to be here and there was going to be a third baseman for the next 10 years. and what were we going to do with Brett Beatty? Where was he going to go? Was he a trade piece? And then that evolved into, okay, now when's he going to get his chance? And I think, it's interesting because Escobar, I do believe, is a guy that's going to have a bounce back year. I think he's got a lot left in him. I think he showed it at the end of last season. And so Beatty may not get the full look this season with Escobar on the last year of his deal, but I think he's going to be a valuable piece. And what he did, even on that last at bat, staying on the left-hander, staying in the count, utilizing the opposite field, is something that I think really bodes well for him and his ability to hit at the big league level. He's not out in front of everything. He's not trying to go and hit home runs.
As Cedrola grounds into the 4-6-3 double play, so Lucesy induces the ground ball right there. But I agree with you, by the way, about Beatty.
By the way, I'm going to make a little correction. I don't do this often, but he was safe at first. At least they called him safe at first.
Oh, he was safe at first?
He was safe at first.
You know what?
Got down the line there.
Do that. You should do that often. What, are you going to have me ignore the fact that there's a runner at first base? Go ahead. Call me out on these things, Todd.
Speaking of speed, this guy up the plate right now, the Castro.
Well, he's kind of like the Jankowski of last year, that Jankowski piece. But, it's one thing that, especially with this regime, with Buck Showalter, with Billy Epler, they really have put an extra emphasis on the traditional skills, the speed, the defense. And so, Jankowski filled a need for them last year, Gore at the end of the season, and they're hoping LeCastro can do something similar to start this season.
Keeping an eye on Escobar going to the net there, into the seats right there. High sky, they're both looking up at, like...
he popped out there, so 2 away. No, I'm just kidding. I saw that one.
Good.
But back to Beatty for a second, because you mentioned his approach against the lefty and Joey Lucesy, and that was something that I think was immediately noticeable right off the bat last year, that he is comfortable hitting both righties and lefties as a young player.
Yeah. I mean, he's got... I compared him a little bit last year when I did some breakdowns on him when he came up and had success right away to John Olerud, and that's a big ask to say that anybody compares to John Olerud. As give us the play-by-play.
Castro flies out to Abraham Halmonte in right field,
Very
2
good.
away.
Thank you.
Cedrola still at first, as I knew from the start.
As you knew, and he hasn't gone yet, even with the bigger bags. Okay, well, little transitional period, but we'll pick up.
This is an intra-squad game, so 2 away means end of the half inning, apparently.
If he gets to the pitch count he wants.
There you go.
And I think maybe they all agreed with you that he should have been out.
Should have been out.
He should have been 3 outs, Gels. That's what happened.
But anyway, go ahead. Talk about Beatty.
What I was saying about Beatty is that, when you only get limited opportunities to see a guy when they're in the minor leagues, you get a lot more opportunity now than you did 10 or 20 years ago because there's a lot of coverage on these guys. But the one thing that I kept noticing about the Beatty highlights is his opposite field power and the way he stayed on the baseball. And as I said, I made a comparison to John Olerud, which is a tall task to have anybody live up to being a John Olerud, but it's the smooth sort of inside-out approach that Beatty has. He's a tall guy. He covers the outside part of the plate. But if he gets something slower, gets something down and in, he's got great power as on the pull side as well. So I just thought the way he was able to kind of maturely have good takes at the plate said, okay, this kid is going to know how to hit here. He's going to find his way how to hit here, no matter what happens in the early going.
So for the blue team right now, it's going to be Dominic Hamill getting the start. And you talk about intriguing. Buck Showalter was talking a lot about Hamill yesterday. He was the top pitching prospect in the organization last year, the organizational pitcher of the year, I should say. 3rd-round pick in 2021, has some elite pitches, and he is somebody that is going to be starting Game 3 in the WBC for Puerto Rico, which, as Buck said yesterday, that shows you everything you need to know about what people around the game think about his potential.
It does, and it also makes sense why he's out there now, because he's got to be a little more dialed up than some of the other guys at this time of the year. But as you said, his 4-seamer is, the spin rate on it is in the, near elite level. It's about 200 RPMs better than the average Major League fastball, and it kind of comes from a 3/4 angle, which also allows him to throw a 2-seamer off that. So those 2 pitches are his bread and butter.
First pitch, Pete Alonso. Skies one out to center field, one away. So challenging right off the bat, the big bopper.
Pete Alonso as the leadoff hitter. Not because Pete plans to steal a lot more bags this year. It's a good way to get these guys extra at bats. And Pete wasn't waiting around right there. He saw a fastball that he wanted, but you saw a little late life on that fastball, got in on his hands just a little bit.
So Buck said he wanted to get his WBC guys at the top of the lineup so that they could get more at bats. And then it was alphabetical order as well. So he said Vogie's not going to be happy about that. And
yeah, well, as a Zeal, I'm kind of used to that, Gills. You don't have to tell me about being last.
They do that at all in spring training?
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. Especially when you're a kid and you come in, your locker's alphabetized, you know, and you're at the Z and you're probably number 68 or 75. But you know, hey, you get used to sitting in the last row in class and. The one thing you didn't want is when they said, you know, we're going to do reverse order, and then you're thrown off guard.
So we go from A, Alonso, to E, and Eduardo Escobar. And you mentioned it last half inning, but you feel like Escobar is going to have a bounce-back season. Why?
Yeah, and it's not just because he got hot in September. Guys get hot in September, and it just could be a culmination of things that have happened over the course of the year.
Saw that elite fastball, by the way, right there, that swing and miss.
Good high fastball. Escobar looked back and said, hey, I thought I caught up with that. But I think the thing that gave me the most confidence in Escobar's ability to have the bounce-back season, I think he'll have, that was a nice two-seamer off the plate, though, is he made a mechanical adjustment in August. He said that he felt like he was crouching down too much, especially on approach, and as we noted all the time last year, he'd take good swings at things and either foul them straight back or pop them up. He wasn't squaring them up. When he stood up a little bit taller and kept his hands a little higher, especially from the left side, you started seeing those same pitches get lined from gap to gap, and you saw his confidence grow. So I think that mechanical adjustment gives me more confidence because it's something that now he feels confident with and comfortable with, and it's not just, oh, I got hot for half a month.
And I'll tell you something else. Most people, I think, forget that these guys are people. You don't forget that.
No,
you knew what it was like, but these guys are people. And
say that all the time.
You know, Eduardo Escobar didn't want to get into specifics, but for the majority of last season, he was dealing with a very difficult issue in his personal life. And he said that as hard as he tried to shut it out, that it really did affect him until that last month and a half of the season. And so, getting to talk with him this spring, he said it's all behind him, and just in terms of a clear mind, that element of it he feels is very different and should allow him to play the game the way that he feels he's capable of.
I mean, that's great news. I think that's great news for everybody. But one of the things that I thought was great about watching this team last year, and it relates to Escobar as well, is as hard as he struggled, you could just see the guys on the team pull for him. They wanted this guy to do well because they recognized that he's a talented player that wasn't living up to his offensive ability especially, but he'd put a smile on his face, he'd root for his teammates, he'd go out and play great defense even when he was struggling at the plate, and he's just a guy that you root for, and you could tell that this team, as he got hot, was right along with him, and they were riding that wave with him because he couldn't be a better guy as a teammate. So that's another reason I'm really happy that he's back in the mix and should be a factor this season.
Nice play by Ronnie Mauricio, who, listen, hasn't always been a straight line for the prospect, but he played a lot last year and in the offseason in the Dominican Winter League and really showed himself nicely in that Dominican Winter League. So I know he's kind of fallen off a little bit when you talk about those top tier prospects that the Mets have right now, but don't sleep on Mauricio, who's still got, a lot of good baseball ahead of him.
Great jump on that ball and made up some ground where a lot of guys wouldn't be able to catch up to that, but he's tall and lanky, he has that good speed, great arm strength, and you saw some real power out of him in the last couple of years, especially in that Winter League, as you said. He's got big pop in that bat as well.
So here's our first look at Omar Narvaez. Mets added him late in the offseason, traded away James McCann, and Narvaez is another one of these guys. He's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what exactly he brings to the table, because defensively he's come a long way. He used to be known as a bat first guy. So defensively has come a long way, and then offensively the last few years, he's kind of alternated between, great season, an all-star season a couple of years ago, and then he struggled at the plate last year, but you'd expect at least to start Narvaez and Nito basically platooning, with Narvaez playing against the righties.
Yeah, and I think the big key to that right there is his left-handed bat. I think that's something that was missing out of that role, and I think something that does make sense from a Billy Epler standpoint to look to sign a guy like this that may not be Gold Glove defensively, but he's improved a lot, as you said. But he is a guy that, as a left-handed hitter, can give you some extra options, can be a guy, and then it kind of poses the question, if you start to mix a guy like Alvarez into the conversation at some point, this guy can be one of 3 catchers potentially, or guys that could catch, and then give him an opportunity to be in the lineup as a DH even, if necessary, if his bat gets hot. So it gives him a lot of options, and that's what I think Buck Showalter and Billy Epler have shown that they like, is optionality. They want to have a lot of variable lineups that they can put out there, and this guy gives them that kind of extra flexibility.
And with Alvarez, it also it takes the pressure off, not just the player, but the organization, right? You've got 2 veteran guys that can get the job done in Nito and Narvaez, and you can really let the top prospect in baseball, as Narvaez flies out to center field to end the first inning, but what it allows is Alvarez to develop, and when he is ready, when the top prospect in the game is ready, then you can call him up, but you don't need to force anything.
The thing about that too is it's always interesting to me to kind of try to judge a guy's makeup by how they handle themselves in big league camp, how they handle themselves when they come to the big leagues. Obviously, Alvarez has been touted for the last few years, and he came to the big leagues, he had some struggles, but he also showed that he's got that power in his bat. He's got that elite bat that might come to life in the near future, but he's a confident kid. That's the other thing about it, right? I mean, he is here in big league camp this year expecting to leave with this team. And, you could say at times, like in my day, you'd see, boy, that's pretty gutsy for a kid to come out and say, I'm going to be a part of this Mets team. But at the same time, especially now, you want a guy that's confident. You want a guy that believes in himself, and then it's up to him to show up between the lines, and he'll have opportunities to do it this spring.
You mentioned his confidence, and about an hour before this Intrasquad game, I had a chance to talk with Alvarez, and I asked him, said, as the number 1 prospect in baseball, does that add any more pressure to you? And he thought for a second, he kind of smiled, he goes, yeah, there's more pressure on the pitchers. And then he laughed.
There you go.
It was good, but he's an extremely confident kid. But beyond that, this is kind of to your point too of talking about gutsiness. To a man, everybody that has interacted with Alvarez, either just recently this spring or who has known him over the years in the minors, has talked about how hard he works and how good the head on his shoulders is and how much he's constantly working to improve. And so I think there's always that thin line between confidence and cockiness, and it matters. And I think he walks it perfectly. He's a very confident kid, but he is by no means cocky or arrogant in any way.
And I think to that point, what you want to hear and what you want to see is that he recognizes he can hit. He recognizes that there's going to be a lot of people that want his bat, but it's important to him to be seen as a big league catcher. He thinks that he is a catcher that can, continue to improve his abilities behind the plate and can catch. I mean, it's intimidating. You walk into camp as a young catcher. I can tell you, when I went to my first big league camp, there was guys like John Tudor and Todd Worrell and Kenny Daly and Joe McGrain and guys that were veteran established big league pitchers. And they had a guy named Tony Pena, who was a perennial all-star and Gold Glove catcher, that caught them. And I go in there trying to figure out, are these guys going to throw into me? What do I have to do differently? And
Eduardo Escobar dives to his right.
As I said,
nice stop.
There's my boy
He
Escobar.
called it. You knew he was going to have a bounce back here.
But it can be intimidating as a young catcher because you're the guy. Everything starts with you back there. And these big league pitchers are used to having a quality guy behind the plate that frames what they throw, that knows what they're thinking, that works with them. And if they don't get it, it can easily lose confidence. So for him, I see him down in the bullpen. He's working. He's catching bullpens on all the guys. And now you've got guys like Scherzer and Verlander at the top of this rotation. And, you know, like, hey, are these guys going to say, hey, we'll take Nito because we know Nito? Or are they going to say, hey, we'll give this kid a chance?
Yeah.
And it's his opportunity to prove himself during the spring.
So we were talking about Mauricio. He's up at the plate right now against Joey Lucchesi. Just curious, as you watch him now, what you're seeing in Mauricio.
Well, I mean, obviously, switch hitter, pop from both sides of the plate. I think he's been, you know, he's created a little bit more discipline over the last couple of years as a prospect. He obviously came up and was in the system as a top prospect. I think he's starting to feel more confident in his ability as a hitter, not just as a guy that they were looking at, you know, potentially could be elite defensively, great strong arm, great physical attributes, but he's also, to me, from when I remember seeing him a few years back, he's strong.
Yeah, he's really bulked
put
up.
On
Yeah,
some weight, and he's got some confidence with that bat. I think it's helped him just with his, you know, his ability to be a little more compact at the plate.
Had an 803 OPS in the Dominican Winter League, and Billy Epler, Buck Showalter were talking about how many at-bats he's taken as he walks there. I think they said something like over 800 at-bats or over 800 plate appearances between the minor leagues and winter ball last year, and so they're kind of watching his workload as well. But it'll be also interesting to see if at any point they start to get Mauricio into some different positions, because clearly he's blocked up here at shortstop for the foreseeable future.
Exactly, and with Beatty being a guy that they're really considering a great opportunity for him at third base, I was going to say we might want to introduce Tomas Nito quickly, because there's a good chance he's hacking at the first pitch. And as he did, at least he hit a foul ball, so we can mention that Tomas is at the plate, and you know, happy for him. He's so happy to be back here, and just I thought he had a phenomenal season last year in a lot of different ways, and really.
What impressed you the most about him last season?
You know, I think the fact that he handles pitchers, I think, really well. He's very good framing the low ball. I did some demos and really looked at the analytics of how he works the glove and improves the pitching and the calling because of his framing abilities. But he also had really clutch moments as a hitter last season in big times where, you know, you kind of sort of discount his offensive abilities at times and think, okay, well, he's kind of glove first, but with sort of the disappointment in McCann and him getting more playing time, you realize, okay, this kid won a batting title in the minor leagues.
I was going to say,
reason.
yeah, he won a batting title in Florida State League.
And the more he gets at bats, the more confident he gets, and I think he did a good job of, you know, making the most of his time at the plate and getting some big clutch hits when they weren't expected from that area in the order.
Jose Peraza comes up to the plate with 2 outs, runner on first, and Peraza back with the Mets, short stint in the organization before, but this kind of goes to show, again, the level of depth that this organization has created. There's a lot of players in camp that either have some experience in the major leagues that are you know, willing to play depth roles in the organization, and it's one of the keys that Billy talks about it a lot. He talked about it the other day, that everybody sees those 25 guys, 26 guys on opening day, but he's always taken a look at the 40 and the level of depth that could contribute over the course of 162.
Well, I think you just look at the Mets over the last few seasons, or look at winning organizations over the last, you know, 5 to 10 years, and you realize that, you know, it's not looked down upon now to be considered a utility guy. I mean, Jeff McNeil is a guy that can play all over the diamond, but he has great value to a guy like Buck Showalter, who likes to use his guys in different positions. He likes to utilize the analytics to his advantage, but he also likes to make sure his guys in today's day and age get the proper rest that they need to make them, you know, at the top of their game. And so guys like Peraza, to your point, are going to be guys that you need to have in the system.
And Peraza lines one down the right field line, just foul. So the count stays 0-2?
I had just a thought. I mean, if folks watching at home, hard to tell whether you can see how many of the pitches by Lucesy are elevated. And I think some people...
I was going to comment. Yeah. I was thinking that he struck out Nito on that pitch up and away.
And it used to be you see a guy that's elevating, you think, okay, he's not getting through the pitch or he's getting a little tired. It's not the case anymore. Guys are taught to throw at the top of the zone. And the reason they're taught to throw at the top of the zone is because over the last decade, with the absolute
launch angle,
influx of launch angle swings, a guy with a four-seam fastball that can pitch at the top of the zone has a lot of effectiveness. And so a guy like Lucesy, especially, he's got a little bit of a sneak to his fastball because he's short arms, and that fastball at the top of the zone also then makes guys chase a little higher, or are they going to protect against that curve that kind of starts at that same high trajectory and then can drop down in front of the plate. So it's effective and it's intentional, in case anybody was wondering whether he's just missing location. No, he wants to live up in the top of that zone.
Todd, when you're facing a guy like Lucesy, who doesn't just have funky pitches, but funky delivery as well, is that something that gets overblown, or can that have an effect on the hitter, on the timing, when it's not traditional the way that he comes at you?
Sure, it does. I mean, I think with enough at-bats, you start to get acclimated to it, hopefully. But, I mean, there's a lot of guys that have remained effective or were effective when I was even playing that utilized some kind of deception in their motion. And it may just be the way they learn to throw, and it's not intentional at all, but maybe they hide the ball a little bit better. You know, you've got somebody that you see sometimes, it's like, oh my gosh, on paper this guy's blowing up the radar gun at 100. He's got a 96 mile an hour slider, and his line drives all over the ballpark because the guys know where to zone in on. They're ready to hit. And then there's guys throwing 86 to 90 with a little bit of movement and a little bit of deception, and can get guys out. The Dodgers had a couple of great examples of that, whether it be Gonsolin or Haney. Those guys were able to keep guys off balance because of the delivery, not just because of the absolute stuff.
So Ronnie Maurizio leads off second. We haven't talked much about how much bigger these bags are, by the way.
Yeah, I read Buck's quote that they look like pizza boxes.
They kind of do. It's Peraza that lines that one up the middle. Jeff McNeil,
a good analogy.
Handles it, throws over to first. So got ourselves a nice pitcher's duel through 1.5. The blue team and the pinstripes scoreless.
I don't know if Lucesy's got any more in him, but it's been a good showing for him after a year and a half on the shelf with the Tommy John. So, but you talk about the bags. You know, I asked Pete about it just off the record, just about, do you think it's going to make much of a difference? No, most of the guys don't think it's going to have much of an impact. But, you know, I think, objectively speaking, I thought first base should have been expanded years ago. I think that's been a no-brainer for a long time, and I have always been a proponent of sort of like the women's softball bags. Have that extra bag in foul territory so the guys can run directly to it, aren't worried about staying inside the line, which that call gets messed up more than it gets done right. And you don't have guys as worried about trying to swipe tag and get a broken arm or dislocated shoulder. So I guess this is a start in the right direction, because the first basemen are going to be a little bit further out in fair territory. But I think that's one that I've been looking for a while.
And what's going to be really curious to see is how the altered bases alter certain results as well, because it was created. The bases were widened specifically to prevent injury, and hopefully that will help in that regard. But one of the things that Buck was talking about yesterday was he thinks it's going to lead to more doubles, maybe more triples, because the bag is significantly enough bigger that when you're cutting the bag, you're cutting it at a closer angle, and that little extra, half second could be the difference between a single and a double.
I love the way Buck thinks about things, right? I don't know if anybody else is really thinking about things at that minute detail. You think, okay, there might be a handful more stolen bases because at second base, how many times on a stolen base is there a replay to actually see if they got the call right or wrong, or if a guy came off the bag for a split second. They're a little flatter, though. I'm wondering if there's going to be guys that have a hard time gripping it on the slides because of the head first slide issue. But it's interesting point that Buck makes about leading to more extra base hits because of maybe that it's tough when you're a runner to time your steps, especially when you hit a ball that you're not sure is in the gap and then it gets in the gap or gets to a point where the outfielder's going to have a hard time making the play and you make the decision 3/4 of the way down to go to second. Sure. Now that little extra loop and the question mark turn might be aided a little bit by the extension on the bag.
By the way, one of the cool things, not just about us doing this game from this angle, but from the angle that people are watching it, is you really get to see the pitch coming at the batter as Almonte lines out one away. And there's something that is so different watching the ball come towards the batter than on TV when you traditionally watch it go away from the pitcher. And you just see, I mean, especially a guy like Hamill, you see why people are intrigued by Hamill. You see that ball just explode out of his hand. And listen, I say it to guys all the time. I think I've said it to you before. When you're at this angle, I have no idea how any of you ever make contact.
Yeah, I wonder that sometimes too. But yeah, it definitely feels like a pitcher's game when you're here and down low and seeing some of the elite pitchers do their thing. And Mark Canha, big fan of Mark Canha, as you well know, and loved his approach at the plate and his ability to work counts.
What do you think about?
He's trying to do it again right now.
What do you think about Canha? Two things with him this year. He said he wants to hit more home runs, that he's intentionally trying to hit for more power, and that's as Canha as it gets. Hit by a pitch.
Hit by a pitch.
Do you know what he said to
I love the look right there.
Do you know what he said to me the other day, though? So, again, sometimes I think so simplistically, because why not? Let's not overcomplicate this. And I say to him, why don't you get out of the way? Like, it's one thing to say, oh, I like getting on base, but I think it's 90+ miles per hour that you're taking in the ribs. That's got to hurt. And he says, oh, it hurts a lot. But my wife actually asked me this the other day, and I've done it for so long now that I physically can't get out of the way. He said, the ball will be coming at me. I'll know instinctually move, but I can't do it.
That's interesting.
Uh-huh.
And I think the one thing about him that I've said on the air last year, watching him get hit by pitches, is especially he works a lot of deep counts. And so he's with 2 strikes a lot, and he doesn't mind hitting with 2 strikes. But when you hit with 2 strikes, like he does, like Nimmo does, and let the ball travel because you don't want to get fooled on the off-speed pitch with 2 strikes and you react to the fastball, that's why you get hit, because he's staying in there long enough to make sure that this isn't a breaking ball that he gets fooled on, and that's become something he's so accustomed to. It makes it, I mean, there's good news, bad news about that. You're going to get hit a lot, but he also gets hit the right way, and people at home would be like, well, what does that mean? Seems like no good way to get hit. Yeah. But if you're coming open because you're anticipating the ball inside and then it rides in on you, or you're not staying in on the breaking ball, then you have a tendency to get hit in the front part of your body. Hands are a lot more vulnerable. Face is a lot more vulnerable. He tucks that shoulder to make sure that he's staying on the breaking ball. So a lot of his hit by pitches are shoulder, elbow, ribs, not necessarily hands and some other extremities that could get injured.
What do you think about his plan to try and hit for more power? Because that can be a slippery slope, right? I mean, he had a good year last year. You don't want to change too much to sell out for that power, but he does seem like the type of guy that he at least knows what he's doing in terms of trying to go about it.
Yeah, and I think with him, it's probably a very methodical plan. I think he always has seemed like a guy that might sell out a little bit earlier in the count, but then if he gets behind in the count, he goes back to using the middle of the field, not being afraid as the ball's driven to left. Nice. Tommy Pham on the hanging curveball. Drove that ball a little bit, but was run down. But Canha, to that point, I think is a guy that really knows his approach. And so if he says he wants to have more power, you could tell he was frustrated at times last year. And there were some times that I think he thought, you thought, I thought, and everybody in the ballpark thought he got all of something, and it ended up
Yes.
on the morning track. And the ball was a little more dead last year. And so I think that can get in your head for a guy that's had thousands and thousands of at-bats. You know when you hit one on the screws, and you know it's going in the seats. And when it starts to drop at the fence, you start feeling, okay, am I doing something wrong? Am I not working out enough? And that, I think, got in his head a little bit last season because he started looking like he was trying to hit the ball out of the ballpark. Now I think he recognizes that it was the result of those other circumstances, and maybe he'll sell out a little bit early in the count, but then still go back to his approach when he gets later in the count.
So I said I had 2 questions about Canna. That was one. The second one, though, is with all these rule changes that we're talking about, the pitch clock, to me, may affect Mark Canna more than anybody on this team because of that methodical approach, because of the way that with each pitch he would step out and really, this wasn't like a superstition, I'm going to step out and move around my hands and redo my gloves. This was I'm going to think about what I just saw and what I think is coming next, and that all of a sudden is going to have to be, at minimum, sped up for him this season.
I wonder, I'm curious because that's a great point. The thing that I found interesting about him is that he would step out, you could see the wheels in motion, knowing where he is in the count, knowing what the situation is, and not getting back into the box until he had the plan. But when he would step into the box, he would step in immediately ready to hit.
Yeah.
As a lot of guys step in, touch the plate, do a little bit of a practice. So I'm wondering if because of that, he can take his 10 seconds outside the box and then step in ready to go, and in that remaining 8 or 9 seconds, he'll be okay because he's already ready once he gets back in the box.
So Alex Ramirez leading things off for the blue team, and this is truly one of the more exciting prospects in the Mets organization. You see him up close in that clubhouse. He is a big dude, a true 5-tool player, a guy that, again, the organization really feels could be a big, big piece down the road here.
Yeah, well, he was just shaking his head on that nasty slider that he just saw, which early in spring when you get painted on the outside corner for strike 1 and then nasty slider. Oh, and there he goes, 0-2 with a hanging curveball, and did what he should have done with it. Drive it right up the middle, to your point. Stays back, got a good idea what he's doing at the plate, young, strong, and like you said, just a rising star in the Mets organization. And it goes to the point that I think we've been talking about anyway. There's this Mets, Mets organization down in the minor leagues was depleted for a while, and they're starting to build that back up, and it's a priority of Steve Cohen, it's a priority of Billy Epler, and it's exciting to see some of the guys that are starting to pay dividends now, and that give them a lot of different options. It's not just that these guys could be great big league players someday for the Mets, but they can also add tools for the Mets to get what they need when they need it, without having to completely deplete the system to do it.
Yeah, and Steve Cohen mentioned the other day that for him, one of the main things that he will view as a success for himself as an owner is if he can build up this farm system to be one that just constantly churns out players, whether it's for his own organization to fill needs or to get, as you put, the players that you ultimately do want from other organizations. Now, the Alex Ramirez thing is, it's really funny. I wonder your perspective as a former player as he takes off for second on the wild pitch. One of the problems that the Mets development people had with Ramirez last year was that he's a very free swinger, and they're trying to get him to hone his strike zone. But when he swings at balls out of the zone, he's got such good hand-eye coordination that he doesn't just make contact, but he's hitting effectively. He's hitting for power on balls that most guys couldn't swing at. So it's very difficult as Stewart lines this one into the gap that'll split the outfielders. Ramirez comes around to score, and Stewart's in there standing up with a double. So Team Blue strikes first.
Team Blue, a couple of 2-strike hits. Nice placement right there. That was good handwork by Stewart there to stay on that outside pitch and not try to do too much with it. But back
But back to my point,
your
so
point.
they're saying, okay, we want to reel him in a little bit, but also we don't want to take away from what makes him effective.
And it's funny because you asked me, I was probably one of the more selective hitters that was in uniform, right? It had to be right there. I took till I got 2 strikes a lot of times, all those things. And I always envied and admired the guys that could walk up there and swing at the first thing they saw, curveball, fastball, slider, up over there in their eyes or down at their shoe tops, and make effective contact. And there was a handful of guys that could do it effectively. Obviously, Yogi Berra is noted for that forever. But guys that I actually played with that saw it, and I think, to your point, are a little bit more. Oh, nice. A little bit more like Ramirez. Guys like Vladdy Guerrero. I mean, Vladimir Guerrero's in the Hall of Fame, and that guy never saw a pitch he didn't like. Raul Mondesi, who was a great player for the Dodgers for a number of years, I used to hit behind him, and I would say, I've got to be ready with my gloves on, all my pregame, my pre-routine, before he walks into the box.
Because that at-bat's going to last 7 seconds.
It's not going to last long. And those guys that, oftentimes the sort of some of the Caribbean players that we've seen are more free swinging. They are taught to be aggressive. They know, that there's, the patient hitters are not going to show the results that they want at a young age. And so they develop the ability to not only be good hitters, but good hitters on pitches out of the zone, which you mentioned, which is an art form.
So Brett Beatty back up at the second at-bat of the day, and we were talking when he was up to lead off for the blue team that, for a while there, with the trade of Correa that was and then wasn't, or the signing of Correa, what was Brett Beatty's future? Was he going to get traded? Was he going to switch positions? And I asked Beatty about what those days were like immediately after, and he said, first of all, we all remember it was the middle of the night. Every one of us had the same waking up to what the heck just happened reaction, including him. And he said that he got a call from his agent, and his agent said to him, this is immediately after, as Beatty skies this one into left center, and that'll split the outfielders. So Beatty with a stand-up double, the second double of the inning for the blue team, and Stewart comes around to score, so 2-0 in favor of blue. And to your point, there's some of that opposite field power again.
Yeah, it was. And the thing that's, that I really look for with a guy like that that's got the opposite field power is not just the ball away, where a lot of big league hitters on the ball away will drive the ball to the opposite field. But that ball was a sinker that started in and came out over the inside part of the plate, and he stays inside. It means his hands stay inside the ball, and that bodes well for him to be able to do that, for one thing, because he's got that great power, and he's got great short quickness to the barrel, from the barrel to the ball on that inside pitch. But it keeps him on time for the off-speed pitches. It's a much more difficult challenge, and as a catcher, I used to see these kind of guys that had that ability. You don't want to throw him a breaking ball, because if you throw a breaking ball strike, then that's when they're going to launch it over the right field bleachers. So you got to try to come in with them. That's where they're vulnerable. But if he's got that kind of hand action on the inside, he can still fight things off or drive balls that are a little bit of a mistake.
So he is a good-looking young hitter, but back to the original story that I was telling, he's also just a really good kid, good head on his shoulders. And so he got this call from his agent, and his agent asked him point blank, hey, what do you think? How are you feeling right now? And he said, honestly, I get it. It's Carlos Correa, and I'm perfectly comfortable. Cedrola grounds one up the middle, just out of the reach of Lindor, and so Beatty comes around to score. 3 across in this half inning for blue. But he said, I just want to play for a championship team. I want to play in the big leagues. I'll play left field. I don't really care. And his agent paused for a second and said, oh, okay, if anybody asks you, just say that. You didn't even need to coach him up. And that was his genuine thought. And so I think when you get players like that, certainly it's human nature to be disappointed if somebody's going to come and block you. But it's not the way he was thinking. And sometimes guys say things like that, and you don't know if they really believe it. I really believe when Beatty said that that's what he meant.
Yeah, well, you recognize just by the way the game has evolved over the last couple of decades, where there's no such thing, or almost no such thing, as a homegrown career player anymore, right? Everybody's moving, everybody's taking the opportunities that are given to them, and organizations are always looking for ways to improve themselves. So if you come through a minor league system and think, okay, my only way to have success in the big leagues is X, because I'm going to be the third baseman for the New York Mets in the next year or two, then you're going to always be disappointed because you never know what's around the corner. And by the way, it may work out like that sometimes. Most of the time it doesn't, and you've got to be able to roll with the punches and not let it impact you, because next thing you know, maybe he's wearing a different uniform because he was a big part of a trade, and that opportunity that he has right then is going to be the most important thing to him. So great to hear that kind of mindset, and as you said, I do think that's actually genuine, not just what he was coached to say.
Right. By the way, the best part of spring training, whether it's spring training games or certainly an Intrasquad game like this, especially for the broadcasters, is you've got two players on the same team in the same organization, both number 32. Both number 32. McLaughlin pitching to Daniel Vogelback. So alphabetic order. Vogelback, the V, finally gets his first plate appearance of spring.
And you hear the howling from the crowd. Boy, he came over and just, being who he is, made himself a fan favorite, this offseason. And, I had the pleasure of having him as one of my elves, Oh, I'm not supposed to say that. I don't know. Or Santa had the pleasure of having
was you?
him. No, I didn't say that, Steve. There's a lot of kids that are still wondering who that was. But I was there. I got to witness it. Mm-hmm. That Vogie and Buck were great elves this offseason in the Christmas party for the Mets. But what a fun guy he is anyway. And you know what? What he does is a skill that Billy Epler, I think, nailed right off the bat. Because when they traded Holderman at the time, I was questioning the move. I'm like, how can you give up what seemed to be a really solid, effective, live, big league arm, bullpen arm? And Billy's like, look, preventing runs is going to be more abundant out there than driving runs. And this guy knows how to get on base. We look at him, and this is the Moneyball, sort of analogy through and through. He's a patient hitter. He takes his walks. His OPS will be 800 because when he gets the ball, he drives it out of the ballpark. But he finds other ways to get on base, even without great speed or other things that would normally be associated with a guy that's a high on-base percentage guy.
And you talk about the approach, and there he is again with working his walk. I know it didn't work out, the approach the deadline Vogelback did. Obviously it was rough for Darren Ruff, no pun intended, but the thought process made a lot of sense and still does. Darren Ruff, we're going to have to see what happens here early on this season. Certainly has a track record, though, of doing really good things from the other side of the plate. And the fact of the matter is that even if it doesn't work out with Ruff, they've got some options there from the right side as well, whether we saw Vientos briefly, but there are some right-handed options as well that you could utilize. And a guy like Vogelback from the left side, he's a really, really nice part of a DH platoon.
Yeah, for sure. Nice slider right there. Got Pete out in front a little bit. Pete took the fastball first pitch this time, since he had a one-pitch at-bat his first time at the plate.
We've been seeing Pete take a lot of live BP. See, grounds this one sharply to shortstop. Good turn by Mauricio. And that was a double play?
That was a double play. And, Pete said, you know what, I'm gonna let the prospect show off right here. I'm not gonna give him my full sprint down the bag at this point. Pete, by the way, is
great shape.
Oh my God, and he's in great shape, and he's always a guy that you can count on, where you almost want to say, hey, back it off just a little bit sometimes, because he goes so hard around the bases. He goes so hard. As a runner around the bases, he slides hard, he plays hard, and you just want to make sure that he keeps himself in shape because he's such a valuable asset.
Pete came onto the set to talk with you and Gary and Jerry during Hot Stove this week. I know you guys really enjoyed that conversation. Anything that
Always.
stood out to you about the talk with Pete?
You know, I think Pete's always, you know, sort of the eternal optimist, but I think, you know, the first thing I asked him is, you know, about a year ago, you were on your way to spring training and got in a horrific car accident, and, you know, you told me at that time, I saw him the next day, he told me at that time his perspective on a lot of things changed, not just baseball, but life in general. And I said, now, looking a year later, how do you think that's impacted you? And he had just really great, thoughtful things to say in that regard, and how I think he just has a lot of appreciation for what he's been blessed with, but just life in general. And I think also carries on to his appreciation for what this organization means to him, for what this opportunity means to him, because nothing's ever promised.
So that's it. You saw the blue team celebrating on the field. Huge win over the Pinstripes by the final score of 3 innings. Of 3 innings. The final score after 3 innings of 3-0. And that's going to do it for our live broadcast of the Mets Intrasquad game. A lot of fun, Todd, as always.
By the way, much more offense to come from the white squad. Just didn't happen today. They got no hit today.
I was going to say, I don't think.
And the blue squad's going to make sure that they remember that, but a lot more offense to come.
I don't think, given the
No
lineups,
panic. No panic.
that it's going to be something sustainable down the stretch. The most important thing to take out of today, though, is that at 6 o'clock, it gets started for real tomorrow on SNY. Gary, Keith, Ron, that pesky sideline reporter, everybody will be on tap for the Mets opening day of spring training against the Miami Marlins. 6 o'clock, SNY. We will see you then. Todd, great to see you, my
Always
friend.
a pleasure. I mean, that one went pretty quickly.
Do it again next year?
Oh, yeah. I'll be right here in the same seat.
All right. Thanks, Todd. See you tomorrow, everyone.